Hey, I'm Daniel Berger, and this is Adventures of a Real Estate Broker. Welcome to the podcast where Metro New York real estate meets great stories and a douse of humor. Forget the dry sales talk. Here we dive into the fun and unexpected moments of real estate. Join me each week as we explore Westchester, Long Island, the Bronx, and more. You'll hear about the people, the places, and the crazy situations that make this industry so interesting. Thanks to our sponsor, Ribak's Prestige Properties, we're ready to share the lighter side of real estate. Whether you're a pro, a buyer, or just curious, we've got something for everyone. Ready for today's adventure? Let's get into it. Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Adventures of a Real Estate Broker with Daniel Berger. Um, Today, we have the good fortune of having Jeremy Goodrich on with us. He is award-winning commercial real estate insurance advisor. He's been the CEO of his real estate business, of his insurance business for, I think, almost 12 years. Which is kind of awesome. He's also the number one, he has the number one real estate podcast on YouTube, which is pretty sweet. It's the CRE Clarity podcast. He's the CEO of Shine Insurance Agency, which he's been doing for 12 years. But he's not just an insurance guy. He went to Indiana University. He was a third and fourth grade teacher, which is kind of awesome. And even before he was a third and fourth grade teacher, he owned a landscaping business. So very different background, but certainly someone that's going to be able to help us and give us some good insight. So with that, Jeremy, thank you so much for being on our episode this week.
Daniel, thank you. Incredible intro. You're right. I've done all those different things kind of all over the place, but been a part of the insurance world and the real estate world now for the last 12, 13 years, and really excited to share with your audience a little bit about kind of what I've experienced, what you've experienced, and what they can learn from those things.
But seriously, but starting out as a third and fourth grade teacher, what better way to get your teeth cut for risk and insurance, or at least for risk, right? Like dealing with that and parents at open houses and all of that. So I guess my first question is, how did being and I'm the child of both my parents are in education. My mother was a teacher, actually a teacher in my high school, which is interesting stories with that as well. But how did teaching lay the groundwork from going into teaching to insurance?
It's a great question. I think that, I loved being a teacher. I spent 13 years doing that. And the transition from kind of an emotional standpoint was very strange, right? I had decided that I was tired of being in debt. I was tired of having the high credit card bills, and I couldn't cut it with the salary that I was making. And so the switch to insurance was very much about, okay, look, I need some financial stability. And I realized that some of the soul would be gone. I just don't think I realized how much of it, right? Like people truly trust you when you're a third and fourth grade teacher. They drop their kids off with you. You spend more time with their kids than they do in some cases. And then you switch to being an insurance advisor, and suddenly no one trusted me. The next week, I was like, I'm the same person. Nothing has changed. But I think really what teaching helped me is the ability to explain things simply, right? If you're teaching a fourth grader how to do long division or arithmetic, there's a variety of ways we can talk about that. But ultimately, a fourth grader doesn't really get why they're even learning it, right? Like, what's the point? And my job was always to bring it to life, to help them, one, understand why it's valuable in their life, and then two, give them the capacity to successfully do it from when I taught them how to do it until, through the rest of their life. And so I think doing that with kids, teaching kids, I always said I love teaching third and fourth grade because I get to teach kids how to love things instead of just how to do things, right? I don't have to teach them how to tie their shoes. Most of them have learned how to do that. I get to teach them how to run. I don't have to teach them how to write a sentence. I can teach them how to tell a story as an author. I don't have to teach them how to read a sentence. I get to teach them how to love a book, right? And so it's a great age for that. And I don't know that I've taught anyone how to love insurance, but my attempt is to at least help us understand what role it plays in our life, how it protects us, how it provides us peace of mind, and how we can use it to the best of our ability to get to our financial goals.
you know, insurance companies and insurance agents and brokers um are certainly low on the list of people that you need until you need it. And so, a lot of people do self-risk, right? Where I know people that don't have health care. Well,
Mhm.
our government does have kind of a safety net in the sense because anyone can go into the hospital at any point, but it's
Right.
clearly not advisable, um,
Yeah.
not have insurance for a few reasons. One is because it costs more money, or it would be if you got ill, but also to keep yourself healthy, right? And it's the same thing with insurance, is that if you don't have proper insurance, then nothing's a problem, right? Because insurance, that premium is just a cost
Right.
until it's actually needed. And when
Yes,
it's
exactly.
needed, that's what that, that's the only point. I mean, I've done a little bit on the back of the envelope, math on purchasing a car and getting insurance. Clearly, they force you to have liability insurance, but
Right.
even like for collision insurance, if you probably and now it's a little different because cars are much more expensive. But when cars were like 30, 40,000, if you could go every 6 years or 8 years and not have a collision,
Hmm.
it would be better to self-insure. But
Yeah.
what happens when you have the massive collision and your car's $60,000 and people don't want to come out of pocket with that? Thus, that's why insurance is, for a car is kind
Mhm.
of important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two parts of this story, right? One is the financial value, and that's what you talked about. And when we're talking about different property coverages, and maybe whether we're talking about a deductible change, right? If you have a $5,000 deductible versus a $10,000 deductible, well, you're gonna pay more money for the lower deductible. But in a loss, you would pay less money out, and the insurance company would pay more. There's all this back and forth about what is the right risk to take. That's the financial side. But there's also the peace of mind side, right? Like, even if you never file a claim on your auto insurance, like you just described, if you're worried, and if you've got a $35,000 car and you're like, man, if that car got smashed tomorrow, I don't have $35,000 to replace that car, I'd be in real trouble. Then it's worth the $500 a year or the $1,000 a year that you're paying for insurance, even if you never use that insurance, to simply have the peace of mind that you wouldn't be in financial dire straits if something bad did happen. So there's the financial side, and that's really almost like the gambling of it all, right? Where's the balance, and what is that? And then there's just the peace of mind side. Look, I'm paying some money every month so that I know I don't end up in financial ruin or I don't end up in a bad place. And I think those two things are both important parts of what we do.
So the way that maybe I make it simpler. So everything it's about your threshold to pain, right? In
Yeah,
essence. So when I go get my iPhone, right, they want 599 or whatever they two what 199 for the insurance or whatever it is.
yeah,
I don't do it. I don't do it because my new iPhone's going to cost me $1,000. So like I'm like, why am I paying that? For the and I've never lost my phone, and then there are other fixes. So for an iPhone, my tolerance of pain is lower, and I'm able to let it ride with that. But I'm not
right.
going to do it with a car, and I'm not going to do it with a house, even if you could, right? So
Yeah.
I did have some plan questions for you, but I think I want to take this in a different direction because I've actually had two insurance claims, and I think if we talk about the stories of that, that might be kind of interesting because
Yeah.
it affects me, and then maybe you'll give me some guidelines onto it, and we'll see if we have the questions after that. But
I
so
love
my,
it. What happened? Tell us the story.
my first one is I own and this is really good because I own an investment, and the investment's a townhouse in the town that I live in.
Okay.
Um, uh, my wife and I are partners with two other people, and it's their LLC. So we're 50% owner, they're 50% owner. I'm smart enough to know that I'm good at what I do, but I'm not good at like on contracting. So we bought a house, so we bought a townhouse that we had to gut renovate. The partner's a contractor, so there you go. So
Mm-hmm.
he gut renovates the house. Luckily for me, I then put it on the market. I lease it. It's leased. The guy doesn't start living in it, but put a few things in the house,
All
right?
right.
And then he didn't tell me he wasn't there yet. And it was a couple years ago, and it was absolutely freezing cold. Um, something happened actually to the hot water heater pipes burst, and we had
Yep.
like we had over $100,000 of damage.
Yep.
And it was, so we had that issue, and then we also talked about, like, I did it without a public adjuster, so it was basically like, waiting for their adjuster, their claims person to come, and it was during a period of that severe cold. I think caused a lot of incidences in New York and on the East
Yep.
Coast. So the normal adjusters, I'd have like travel adjusters, right? People that came
Right.
from other parts of the country, and it took forever to get one. Then you got one, and then they got assigned, reassigned. So you were dealing with like a fair amount of time. It probably took a month before I even got somebody in there. Um,
Hmm.
and we're really going through the process of getting it done, so that whole process. So, you know, that was, and it was really fighting with them, and it was like forcing them. And what I will say is, that was with State Farm,
Yeah.
and I did have a local agent, and so I
Hmm.
felt that, like, I liked that, right? Because I had a person in my town that who was helping me with the woes that I was having. So I did have a contact person who was great, right? Like, they were there. They made their own phone calls, and throughout the entire process, it was a struggle, but at least I had somebody who was giving me some insight. So that was kind of cool about the process.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I want to break down for your listeners just a little bit kind of what you're talking about here, because everyone who's listening right now could end up in the exact scenario that you ended up in, right? Whether you have a larger property or a smaller property, a condo or a single family unit, water damage, frozen pipes for those of us that live in places where the temperature gets cold are the most common loss that we have. So you had a property, you invested money in that property, you've got this property set up. You don't, in your case, you didn't even have any revenue coming out of it yet. You've put money into it. You're in this position, and suddenly it gets cold. You don't realize someone's there. The thermostat isn't turned up, whatever the situation is. Water pipe freezes. Water pipe thaws 2 days later, bursts. It's 3 stories up, the water, and no one's in the building. So I don't know how long it took for you guys to realize that the water was
Well,
running.
that's actually funny. They're connecting properties, and so the neighbor basically called us and said, "Hey, you're leaking into my kitchen." That's
Your water
actually
is
how
leaking
we.
in.
And
Yeah.
it was the 2 days after the thaw that's when the problem actually happened. So
Yeah.
I didn't say that, so that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and I get pictures from clients and water is, pouring out of their ceiling into their kitchen, right? So
I have that on video. So there we go.
exactly. Exactly. So, very common scenario, and especially when the pipe bursts high up, like in New York, you've got a lot of up and down as opposed to horizontal, right? And so a lot more loss. So, like you said, about $100,000 of loss. So, how does insurance engage? And one of the things I noted here that happens so often and people don't even think about is oftentimes when one person has a claim, a lot of people around them are having claims too. Water pipes burst because of really cold temperatures. Not just one, not just your condo, whole bunch of people's condos. Wildfires obviously is a significant size that people are dealing with in California right now. If you have a tornado come through, oftentimes when people are experiencing loss, a bunch of other people are in the same place. And so, as you experienced, it's harder to get to an adjuster, and you haven't talked yet about the materials to do the work. But I would imagine, although New York may be different, but it can often also be hard to get materials. And of course, the cost of materials then increases. So, those are all things that I'm hearing as I hear about your claim, and we can walk through the process of the claim. But I just wanted to help your listeners get grounded in this is the situation you're sitting in when the neighbor calls and says, "Hey, there's water running through the drywall into my kitchen. I've got a feeling your unit is totally flooded," and is right.
So the other issue that you have to do is, you have to kind of have talk to the insurance company immediately and have them say the words to try to mitigate. Right?
Hmm.
Mitigating is trying to prevent future damage from happening, because I kind of felt like I didn't want to do anything without the insurance company giving me permission to do it, because then I felt that they wouldn't pay for things. So I got them to quickly say mitigate. So then my job is to stop, but not, is to do demolition and to do whatever I can to
Hmm.
to prevent further damage, mold. other things like that. So like we did have a dumpster on our property right away. One part that this is interesting that you'll probably appreciate more than others is that renters and homeowners insurance doesn't usually cover a vacant property. And I got
Yeah.
lucky
Hmm.
because I had signed the lease like 2 weeks before, and he wasn't living there, but he made the attempt to have a few. He didn't have beds
Yeah.
or anything there. He had a few items there, and so you know, technicalities are kind of important, in my view,
Hmm.
especially when you're dealing with insurance companies because they like to follow the letter of the law, especially if it helps them.
Yeah, two things I heard there. So the first is, this mitigation piece. I think a lot of people don't know what to do at that first moment. And I think a lot of people think that they need to be like you just said, think they need to get permission from their insurance company to start to mitigate the bad thing. And it's actually in most insurance contracts says you are responsible to stop the damage immediately. You don't have to call us and ask us for permission. So I want your listeners to hear that. Yes, of course, it's good to call your insurance company right away. But if you are stopping the damage, and I'm not saying like pulling out drywall yet, although I'll get to that. But if you're stopping the damage, stop the damage. If you can put a tarp on the roof so that stuff doesn't come through, put a tarp on the roof. If you can obviously turn off the water and put out the fire or whatever the thing is. But I think once you get past that immediate point of turning off the water or putting out the fire or putting the tarp on the roof, you can continue forward as long as you are documenting properly. And the best way to do that is to hire a remediation company. So if you don't have your own contracting company, like maybe you were in the situation, most of us don't, right? And so, if you hire remediation companies, and there's great remediation companies out there, no matter where you live in the country, then those folks are specialists in making sure that things are documented so the insurance company is going to be able to properly cover the loss. And so you can begin the remediation process earlier necessarily than a month later when the adjuster actually gets there. And so I think a lot of people think they have to wait for insurance, and reasonably so. You do not want the insurance company to deny your claim because you fixed it already and they can't prove anything. But if you bring in professionals to help you solve that problem, they know how to take that action and move that process forward. So I think that's a key point. As far as occupancy, you make such a really good. Your State Farm agent did not do you any favors by placing a homeowner's policy on a house that was vacant. That is incorrect, and as you learned, almost made your loss not even covered. Right? It sounds like you got through by the skin of your teeth because there was someone who was about to be in there. If you have a vacant property and you have it insured as a homeowner's property or a tenant occupied property, it is very possible that the insurance company denies the claim because the occupancy was incorrect.
Yeah. So, um, my wife's an attorney, so so that's the other thing is I was making sure that I lined my ducks in a row and properly stated stuff um about what's factual, right? So because so that was really important, and so hopefully people can learn the lesson because now I learned the lesson, right? Like if I have a vacant property and I'm doing work before, then I have to have one type of policy and I'll switch over to
Hmm.
another policy once I have a signed lease. It was a signed lease, so I think it's a signed lease, but having some items in the house certainly shows that there was an intent to occupy. Besides
Yeah.
that, he paid me first month rent and security deposit.
Yeah, I
So
mean, I think the insurance company probably could have gone either way on that. If they wanted to battle you on that one, they maybe could have. Fortunately, you had an adjuster who was doing what good adjusters do, and that is finding coverage as
well,
opposed to
except
finding ways
except that
to.
I would
Yeah.
say that the adjuster took so long to get there that at
Yeah.
that time they would it could have looked like that we vacated like the tenant had to go find a place and
Well,
pull
yeah,
all
that's
their
true. It
stuff
would have
out.
been
So
would have
that
been
so
vacant either way. Yeah.
they might not have known about that,
Yeah.
but it was a back and forth, and maybe a public so a public adjuster I guess generally gets like 10 or 15% of the claim. Is
Hmm.
that true?
Yeah, so a public adjuster for your listeners is when you decide, look, I want to hire someone to help me navigate this situation. A common example that we're more used to is a personal injury attorney, right? If you get injured in an accident, there's all these billboards all over the country, hire a personal injury attorney and they'll walk you through it. A public adjuster is the exact same thing as a personal injury attorney. It's just for property damage instead of bodily injury, right? A personal injury attorney is help walking you through. Now, a public adjuster is not an attorney, so there are those differences there. But a public adjuster is hired by you, the insured or the person who owns the property, to walk through the insurance claim. And you're exactly right. There are some negatives to public adjusters. The positive is they kind of jump in and they navigate these details, right? Not everyone has a lawyer for a wife. Not everyone has a lot of property experience, and a public adjuster could help you navigate the process. The downside of a public adjuster is they take from 15 to 20% of the claim, maybe from 10 to 20% of the claim, depending on the public adjuster. They also block you out of the process, so the flow of money goes through the public adjuster. And so they position themselves between you and the insurance company. And so that's the way that they can keep control of the money. And so you lose a lot of control in the scenario where you hire a public adjuster, just like you lose control when you hire a personal injury attorney to help you navigate a bodily
So,
injury
so it's
claim.
funny as I'm listening. So I'm trying to listen too because that's a good trait, right? At least my family tells me that.
Yeah,
I actually think a public adjuster is more like an accountant because the personal injury attorney, while you can sue, you can't represent yourself really in court.
right.
A lot of state. So an accountant, it's more like an accountant because you can do your own taxes, right?
Yeah.
But generally, you don't want it, as they get more complicated, you want to hire an expert, and an expert could. So, like a C, so I think it's more like a CPA. So I'm going to say it's based off of what you're saying because you can't really sue, you can't really from a liability sue someone, but certainly from an accountant standpoint, you can, and a CPA would probably be that intermediary. But what you're
Yeah, I mean,
saying is
there's a back
certainly
and forth there because
fair.
it comes down to motivation too. So a CPA's motivation is generally to make sure that your finances are aligned well, are taken care of, and ultimately you have the benefit, right? You pay a CPA generally the way it works, whether it's hourly or whatever, to benefit you. The way a public adjuster gets paid is really to benefit them. The more money they make, the more percent they get, right? So it's how do I push up the claim loss? How do I push it up? And what I see happen a lot is that public adjusters muck up the process. And so what they want to do is make it so complicated and confusing that you, as the owner of the building, feel like the insurance company is really, really bad. And they do everything they can to make the insurance company mad. So ultimately, the number gets higher and higher. And ultimately, they take it to it is sort of a court process, right? There's an entire
Right.
process that you go through until you get out to the other end of the claim. So a public adjuster makes the most money if it's complicated, it takes a long time, and ultimately it gets out the back end 3 years down the road, and it has been a total mess, and the insurance company is just forced to XYZ. So that's not always the case. If a public adjuster were on this panel right now and we were talking back and forth, we'd certainly have a back and forth conversation. But that is what I've seen from
Well,
when people bring public
I
adjusters.
love hearing your views on that because it's different, but I mean that's from your experiences. So to
Yeah,
me, that's true. And yes, in my case, it was a little different because um I was relentless and constantly calling and constantly why are you going 3 days or 5 days with that? You said you were going to be here. We don't, but and then also from being my partner's a contractor, who's a good contractor, they can come in and say what they want, right? And in the end of the day, he's going to know more. And so when he was walking
right.
the property with them, he's able to talk about stuff and throw out, contractor speak to shows that he knows what we're talking about and whatever. So in the end of the day, in that case, I think I got enough money. Should I have gotten more? Maybe, but I got enough money because my partner's a contractor that it was enough money to fix what we needed to fix and then move on. So we did also get lost revenue because I
Yeah.
didn't charge. I had a lease. I didn't charge my tenant during that period. He hadn't moved yet, so he was able to stay where he was. But um So that was, but it was real. It's a struggle,
Yeah.
and so I guess in some people that don't want to be involved in it, a public adjuster makes sense because they don't want to have to deal with it. They don't, it was a lot of time and effort. So if you don't want to do that, then you're like, I'm going to pay 20%, and then hopefully your adjuster either gets 20% more than what you need, or some
Hmm.
other factor, and that's it's kind of like an extra premium in this in a sense.
Yeah,
So.
I think in general, my best advice is start to navigate the claim on your own and see how your relationship is with the insurance company. Give the insurance company the opportunity to do the job that they're supposed to do for you in the process. Now, if you own a large commercial building, you have an extremely large, complicated loss, I would have a different opinion. Almost all of those scenarios, you should hire someone to help you because you're a big business owner. Your job is not to do the things, to follow up with insurance companies and stuff like that. So that's very different. But if you own a single family property, a duplex, whatever, and you're having these scenarios, let the insurance company give them the opportunity to take good care of you because ultimately it's going to turn out better if you don't have a public adjuster in the middle, 9 times out of 10.
So here's my here would be like Danny's cursed. Um, so in New York, last March they changed the rule on disclosures. So in New York, it used to be when you sold the property, you would give the buyer $500, and you would say, I don't have to tell you anything about my property, kind of buyer beware. Um,
Right.
that's a kind of odd, right? You should be like, if you know something, you should have to tell it. But so that's what they switched to in March. So last March, I'm like, okay, I'm not, I've been in my house since 1997. I'm not going anywhere, but I knew that I had an abandoned buried oil tank filled with cement in my front yard from like the week we moved in. And I'm like, you know what? I should just pull it because not that I'm moving now, but I'm younger now. I'm in the business now. If I sell when I'm 75 or 80, it's going to be more complicated. And why not get it out? Have an oil guy uh, come. And I think I met the guy because he's done some stuff for some clients. And I think he was also on my block doing a major oil problem. And so he's like $1,800. I'm like, great, we'll do that. He's like, Coach, I have an above ground tank in my garage. He's like, well, we have to. Their codes changed since 1997. We have to put a ballast up and some other stuff. Oh, great, $1,800, no problem.
Yeah.
So he comes. He. The funny thing is when they were coming to dig, he's like, "Where do you think it is?" I go, "I think it's over here." And it's like that's how bad the memory is. It's like I was wrong. It wasn't the spot that I thought it was. You
No.
know, and I had
Yep.
seen it. So,
Uh-huh.
but it was years and years ago. So he
Right.
digs up, and we smell oil, and it's
Hmm.
like, oh, it's bad. And like, you pull the permit to do it. You're the village, the inspector has to come. And immediately, I think the rule in New York is within 2 hours of finding that there's contamination, you
Yeah.
must you must call like New York State to open
Yeah.
up to open it up.
Yeah.
So um I'm this one I can't really name the my homeowner's insurance, which
Yeah.
actually I had continuous coverage since we bought the house in 1997, which is kind of interesting.
Okay.
And I did have a local, I had an agent actually, um it was a childhood friend's father who had an insurance business, and it was a national brand, and he was the broker for multiple types of insurance.
Right.
And so they open it up, and it's basically, so now you have to like file the claim, and figuring right within minutes, like that insurance company declined me, like, oh, we don't cover that. And then I had to go,
Hmm.
and then I had to keep at it and add it and add it because it was
Right.
basically then trying to go to more of the liability aspect of it, and for environmental as well. So again,
Hmm.
using my agent, um pushing, pushing, pushing. So it took like maybe 2 weeks to have the insurance company hired a company to come to test the soil and test the water. And they go like 14 feet in the ground, and they get to the water table, and they and this is taking time, and another week goes by. It turns out when they tested the water supply, it contaminated the New York State water supply.
Hmm.
Thankfully. I'm
Hmm.
thankful that I did that because I think if I didn't do that, let me see. If I didn't do that, then I think the claim would have been all on me.
Hmm.
Because there's a law in New York State that basically says I'm forced to fix it. And if I don't fix it, they come in and they fix it. It's going to be a lot more expensive and I'm still responsible. So the insurance company feels that there's going to be they have some liability. So the whole process happens. I get the go ahead from the insurance company to begin to begin the cleaning. But it's interesting that the insurance company never really followed up as it was going along of how long they didn't come to look at it. They wasn't really a back and forth. And guess how much? So 18 truckloads of contaminated soil were removed from my property.
Yeah.
Any idea what the cost of that is?
75K.
$292,000,
Yeah.
right? And, and so 292,000, right? And so
Right.
because they kept having to dig and dig, and I ended up losing parts of my driveway. I lost my sidewalk. I lost like that's not even including the number that I gave you was just the cleanup. It wasn't the sidewalk. It wasn't the driveway. I lost like a Japanese maple that had a value of like $15,000. I lost, my front landscaping. You're in the landscaping business, so um,
Yep.
so
Yeah.
I didn't even that I ended up paying all myself because that part of the policy wouldn't have been covered. But you would have thought that the insurance company would have been keeping a better log of how the process is going to ensure that it was being cleaned up. And then it became a back and forth with the insurance company sending legal precedents to my wife, who then read it and goes, "That's quite funny. It looks like it protects us more." So in the end of the day, we, they, I had to sign an NDA. So, but I can, so you would think that somebody that signs an NDA is probably happy with where it ended up, or they wouldn't have done that and they would have continued with other things. But like that is extremely complicated. I've actually become a much better real estate broker and agent now for any home that has oil tanks because
Hmm.
I understand what a leaking tank can be, how to go about fixing that. So that's a crazy claim.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to that claim. I mean, there's some basic things that I think are good for your listeners to hear. One is just don't mess with an oil tank. If you know there's an oil tank on premise, if you can, I mean, that's a big red flag to me on a property, and that's pretty common, especially in the commercial world. You see, there's a lot that would be fairly valuable close to my home, where there used to be a gas station. No one wants to buy it because they don't want to have to deal with everything that you just described there. So, avoiding dealing with oil tanks might be number one. But number two, I think that the differentiation that was going on through that process are the two different types of coverage that your homeowner's policy have on it. One is property coverage and the other is liability coverage, right? Property coverage is covering your stuff, replacing your stuff if bad things happen to that stuff. Liability coverage is bad things that happen to other people because of you. And so your homeowner's liability coverage actually extends out from your house. In this case, it doesn't matter, but it's worth mentioning, right? If you go to a golf course, you hit a golf ball, that ball hits a car, that car causes an accident, and people are injured. You are the one who caused that injury, right? You hit the golf ball that was the source point of all those bad things that happen. Well, where does your insurance? What's your insurance? It's actually your homeowner's liability coverage that extends out to the world beyond your home. So even if you're a renter, it's really important to have renter's insurance because that renter's liability, same thing, right? And so what I think happened in this scenario is the insurance company first hears, well, he's digging up oil, not our problem, not our problem, right? Like they, are thinking, well, not our problem. It's just a part of, owning a home and maintenance of a home and having to detail something there. And then they hear that it affected the water supply. And suddenly that becomes a liability issue. Suddenly something bad happened to someone else. That's specifically environmental liability, which is often excluded on homeowners policies, but that's a different conversation. Um, but we saw environmental liability. There's something that could potentially bad happen to other people because of you or your property in this case. And it seems that it went through the process and ultimately they probably decided to cover the loss, which, depending on how the wording of your policy, may have actually been kind to them. But it really depends on what they wanted to fight or not fight, what they wanted to navigate or not navigate because of the policy there. So,
So
yeah.
it's interesting because you are right that many policies today exclude that. Luckily for me, my policy dated back for so long ago. And so part of the process was they had to go review the my policies. Like it was, and it's their responsibility to find them. And so there were there was maybe 2008 and later was excluded, but to that from 97 to 2008, it was included. And so that became a lot of what the topics were.
Hmm.
Um, what's interesting also is in my oil tank, the day we moved in, we had no shower, no hot water. We
Hmm.
were like, we called the oil company, the company, and they're like, "Oh, they didn't tell you there's sludge in your tank," and we're like, "No, they didn't. They didn't tell us that." So we're like, we cleaned it
Yeah.
out and whatever. Um, so that's what we cleaned it out and then we abandoned it, right?
Hmm.
So and that's when we put it like we just day one we're homeowners, we're spending $7,500. We just bought the house to put a new tank in our garage. And so part of it was like we never put oil in the tank. So we never even caused whatever this might have been to happen. That was part of the issue. Um,
Right.
and then they probably wanted to pay over all policies. We're like, but the incident happened before we owned the house, so that it really should have been the first policy, right? That policy
Hmm.
should have been the one that covered it. And then there's also questions about subrogation, like my insurance, and we tried to help. We told our insurance company we didn't put any oil in. Go back to the other owner, and
Yeah, you
whomever
could.
did this spill will
Yeah.
help you get your money back from them. But I don't know if they really wanted to do that, but it was something that was, that I brought it up. I'm like, this wasn't even you. We kind of moved into this problem. Um,
Yeah. Two thoughts I'm hearing as you're talking. One is, when we get into the weeds of an insurance policy, this back and forth that you just described is the evolution of insurance policies. I was on a jury for a week for a murder trial one time, and you were supposed to bring a book, and I brought my homeowner's insurance policy, the whole thing, the forms, all the nerdy, language on all those pages that you
right.
never read, and I studied this thing. And what I realized, I think, over time, after I kind of learned what was going on, is insurance policies are this back and forth that we're talking about. Insurance was set up to do this one thing. At the very beginning, right, way back, Travelers Insurance was one of the first insurance companies. They were just there if you had a fire, right? If you had a gas leak, not covered. If wind came and blew off your roof, not covered. Nothing covered except for fires, right? And so coverage started to expand from there. Okay, we'll cover this other thing if it happens. Okay, we'll cover this other thing, and expand, expand, expand. And then claims get filed, and it's like, okay, well, that wasn't really what our intent was when we put these words in the policy. We weren't expanding that far. And now we have to put an exclusion in the policy. Now we have to put language in the policy that says, hey, if you find an old oil tank that's polluting the, water underneath, that is not covered because that's really not what we were trying to do. And this relationship between expansion of insurance policies and contraction by exclusions often now, because it's so complicated, is what frustrates people in loss scenarios, right? You think, well, insurance should just cover it. Like if something bad happens, insurance should just cover it. And we probably could set up the insurance scenario that way if we wanted to. Everyone would complain about the price, right? It would be too expensive. And so there's the back and forth. And I think there's just understanding that basic function of the contraction, expansion, and contraction of how insurance policies work, and the fact that not everything is covered. If something is a maintenance issue, it's really not often covered on your policy, because insurance policies aren't there to maintain your home. They're to take care of you when a bad thing happens. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's there. Here's another crazy thing that you're going to be like, oh, you're going to shake your head about with the oil spill is that my wife and I had moved our house into a revocable trust,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't know that I then needed to tell my insurance company that they need to add my revocable trust as an insured on my policy.
Right.
So my wife and I were crossing our fingers that that didn't come up, because that could have been more legalese that they could have tried to fight, saying, well, you're not even the owners of the house. So it's kind of, again,
Yeah.
in reality, my wife and I are still the owners of the house. It's in our, we own our trust, the revocable trust, but it's another layer that I've seen in a lot of different podcasts and whatever. If somebody owns a house in a trust, their insurance policy needs to have that trust name on the policy. So
Yeah.
I couldn't do anything as this was happening because I didn't want to like draw attention to it. Of course, after I did, um, I don't know how much legalese. I mean, it could have been a question that they could have tried to block it, but we were probably paid off the 1997 policy. At that point, the house was in my was not in the trust, right? So you're kind of going back to that because we only found out this information. But again, as you peel back the onion, lots of complications can come, that could have prevented it. So that we were very nervous about that.
Hmm.
And then another thing, we were like, my wife, we had an umbrella policy with my wife, and my wife switched jobs, and the umbrella policy then expired, and I just never got a new one because it was expensive, whatever. And again, it's a risk. It's about risk, right? And
Hmm.
I didn't value it until now. Now since then I've had these issues, right? So after the oil tank, we went to multiple insurers to try to get an umbrella policy, and we got I got to them about to take my credit card information every single time because everything else is good. I have proper
Right.
coverage with this and proper coverage with that, and no debt and blah blah blah. And then they're like, "Have you had a claim over $50,000 or more in the last 5 years?" And my answer is yes. So after getting denied by a couple of national people, so AAA, my wife's like, "Oh, I got an email from AAA. They do umbrella policies," because we were trying to do different groups where they might not ask all the questions and would just let us sign up. So I actually contact AAA, which I never thought would have been one to do because I've been talking to brokers and I need a group. I need this umbrella policy. Get it, couldn't get it. And then the dreaded question comes: have you had an insurance claim on, within the past 5 years? And I said, and I explained to him, I said, I have an NDA. I am willing, if you can get them to waive it, I'll talk to you about it. You can talk to them about it. But I said it was an oil. And so I said, can you do me a favor and can you talk to your underwriter? And believe
Hmm.
it or not, the AAA guy, and I was like, I'm trying to promote the guy. He didn't send me some information. I got to follow up with him. But he's like, sure, I'll follow up. Geico wouldn't do it. Nobody would do it. He
Yeah.
he calls me back and he goes, well, they're going to write it because that question is based off of if your dog bit the mailman or somebody drowned in your hot who got injured in your hot tub. It is not about an environmental. Because I said, hey, my house is now clean, right? I have $300,000 of a clean front lawn. And I also said I would exclude that, right? If I'll exclude an oil contamination in the front of my yard as part of the policy. And I didn't have to do that because they were like, that is not the intention. So sometimes even trying to get to the right people to talk to them. And I praise the AAA guy, because he didn't have to do it. Of course he makes money now that the policy is written. And right away we were like, I'll take whatever is the highest umbrella policy you have. I think it was a $5 million policy. And because of these things that I had, I think it was like 3,600 or whatever it was. We're like, I'll sign me up. And like, I wanted to
Hmm.
get bound immediately because it was so hard for me to now get that, right? And now at least I'm covered. But it's interesting how one views risk and insurance, right? Because after what I've had, I was desperate to get an umbrella policy. And it was the happiest $3,700 we've ever spent on insurance.
Yeah, and I think for your listeners, an umbrella policy is excess liability, right? So that liability in that example, the environmental liability, but better examples are the ones you said there. A dog bites someone, or someone, your back porch collapses and people are injured or worse. You have liability coverage on your homeowner's policy or your tenant policy or your commercial policy, depending on what properties you have. But sometimes that liability coverage isn't enough. You say, hey, I don't want only $500,000 of liability coverage. If I imagine a worst case scenario, I would need more coverage than that. And that's when you can add a personal umbrella to your personal policies or a commercial umbrella to your commercial policies. And that's just simply excess liability coverage, extra liability coverage. So if you added a $5 million umbrella, your primary homeowners is maybe $500,000. And so in a worst case scenario, you have $5.5 million of insurance companies, of insurance coverage, which essentially says there's not any chance that anyone's going to be able to come after my personal assets because I have enough insurance that almost no matter what happens, it would cover that situation.
And again, as we get older, things happen and you learn more about it. I wouldn't have really, as a younger person, wouldn't have necessarily known this, but from life experiences. And so I guess also, to be fair, as you get older, the risk is higher, right? Because if I don't have assets when I'm younger, then
Yeah.
I'm not, what am I protecting, right? So now that I'm able to have a house that doesn't have a mortgage and an investment property without a mortgage and, all this other stuff, um, you run to try to protect more. But,
Yeah.
I
One
mean,
one rule of
Jeremy,
thumb, one rule of thumb is protect your assets. And so if you look at your asset base and you have, $500,000 in assets, then make sure you have 500,000 to $1 million of coverage. If you're sitting on 3 million, and there's lots of ways to parse assets, and we're obviously not going to get into that in this podcast. But if you're sitting on $3-4 million of assets, then you should have, $3 million of liability coverage. Now, if you're sitting on $20 million of assets, the rules change a little bit. But as far as, for those folks who are in that range, have enough liability insurance coverage to cover your assets.
I mean, it's very happy to have you on the podcast today. Insurance is something. It's I don't think people don't know enough about it, and you are, to me, like, I can't imagine the people, like, when you went from being a school teacher to insurance, and they're like, you're the same guy, yet they're not talking to you.
Yeah.
You really, your presence, you just seem like a really good guy, that you care about people, and obviously you're intelligent and you know the process. So thank you for that. How
Yeah.
you have an insurance business, it's probably a little bit more on the commercial side, but how, if people are watching the podcast, can they get in touch with you either for questions, watch your podcast, and also maybe even get coverage in states that you work in?
Yeah, absolutely. So Shine Insurance is our brand, is the business that my wife and I built. Shineinsurance.com is where you can find a lot of things. If you look up Shine Insurance on YouTube, you'll see that channel. Not the biggest real estate channel, but the biggest independent insurance channel. I'm not bigger than State Farm's channel or anything, but biggest independent insurance channel. And so you can find us there, answer questions there. We have courses on home and auto insurance, courses on commercial real estate insurance, courses on business insurance in general. And then obviously at shineinsurance.com, you can reach out and find us.
Well, people will, I'm sure there's a lot of great information there. Thank you. I mean, this was a long one. It was 50 minutes or so. Jeremy, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much. It's good to have it documented so people can come back and listen, and then find you as well. So for another edition of The Adventures of a Real Estate Broker, it's Daniel Berger. Thanks, everybody. Until next time. Thank you. Thanks for joining me on The Adventures of a Real Estate Broker. I hope you enjoyed our time together as much as I did. If you laughed, learned something, or just had a good time, do yourself a favor and subscribe to the podcast. A big shout out to our sponsor, Remax Prestige Properties, for making this all possible. Remember to leave a review if you enjoyed the show. It helps more people find us. Until next time, keep it real, keep it fun, and keep exploring the adventures in your neighborhood. I'm Daniel Berger, your New York realtor, and I'll see you in the next episode.